Thank you for joining my virtual talk. My name is Bonnie Perdue, and I am a faculty member in psychology and neuroscience at Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia. Today, I will be talking a little bit more about some of my experiences in using Zoom and more specifically using breakout rooms in the fall semester of 2020. And what I hope to share are some ideas that I generated in response to feedback from students regarding their experience in using these different platforms. So just to offer a quick background, as everyone is well aware, the year 2020 led to many changes in the world, but also many changes in terms of pedagogy. And most specifically, many of our courses were shifted to an online environment. And for my college, this meant we actually were fully online for 2020. And this is something that some of us had experience with, some of us did not, but there was this widespread shift. And this is continuing during 2021, and I think we'll have some long-standing effects on the nature of education and how we as faculty are able to best connect and best support our students, whether we're back to an in-person environment or whether we are engaging in a virtual way. So, as I am sure many of you experienced, there were a lot of things that were quite successful in making a shift to an online learning environment. There are so many wonderful technologies there that simplify the process and make it easier for us to connect to our students in ways that may not have been possible not that long ago. And so I think there were a lot of successes when it comes to technology and pedagogy, but there were also some at least in my case, there were certainly some areas for improvement and some opportunities to adapt and make the technology a more effective learning tool for our students. And so what I'm going to share with you today is not a particularly data-driven experiment or research question. It's more of my experience in the fall and what I was able to do in response to student feedback to generate an idea that I think was beneficial for students and certainly improved my experience in some ways I'll talk about more in a moment. And so this is really just me sharing an idea with you, and I hope that it's something that will be helpful for you in the classroom, whether you are in person or in a virtual space. So again, we all have learned so many new terms and ideas that are now part of our common language. And so many of us are very familiar with online platforms such as Zoom, which allow for live video conferencing. This is certainly a way that I have a lot of meetings nowadays, but also a way that I was able to connect with my students in the fall of 2020. In the spring as well, but I'm kind of focusing on my experience in the fall, where it was a more, I guess I should say, intentional process than in the spring of 2020, where things shifted rather abruptly. So in the fall or over the summer, I was preparing my courses and trying to think of ways in which I could use these different digital platforms and technologies to really kind of maintain that interactive aspect of the classroom that I love so much and I know students benefit from. And as I was doing some research on Zoom, I came across the idea of breakout rooms, which were really exciting to me as a faculty member. So in case you're not familiar with breakout rooms, what it allows you to do within Zoom, and other platforms have similar kinds of options, but it allows you to sort your larger virtual call or your larger virtual conference into smaller subsets of students that can then have these sort of private interactions. Now, as the instructor for the course, you can actually enter each of these different rooms, as they're called. So the breakout rooms, so you can pop into different rooms where students are meeting and discussing material to either listen in or offer feedback or encouragement in some way. So when I was developing my course plans for the fall, I was really excited about breakout rooms because now, rather than just having 30 students, or depending on where you teach, 100 students or 200 students all in one Zoom space together, where it is very hard, if not nearly impossible, to have those individual interactions that can be so rich and meaningful, breakout rooms provided a way to do that. So now students, rather than just being the recipient of what I'm sharing with them, or perhaps you've got a few dominant students who are willing to speak out in that kind of forum, now instead of that, you have an opportunity to put them in a smaller group where they can spend time really digesting the material in what I hoped was a more comfortable setting and forum for the students. And so again, I was really excited. I came up with different ways to do this across my courses that I was teaching, and my general approach at the beginning of the fall was to have little discussion sections. So in our larger Zoom class, we would have a bigger conversation, and then go into these smaller Zoom rooms where students could really get in there and debate and discuss what we had covered in terms of the content in the larger class. So this was my intention when I set out the semester. But as I like to do, normally mid-semester, but when we shifted online, I actually started soliciting monthly feedback. I would ask students, what's working for you? What's not working for you? What could be improved? And if this is something that you have not done, I would strongly recommend it and encourage it, because it's really surprising sometimes that things you feel like are going to work really well are not. And if you wait until the end of this semester for that final feedback, it's sometimes too late to make changes that can really have a large influence on the flow of the course. So by doing it earlier in the semester, I found that I can adapt pretty quickly to student needs that I may not have even been aware of. So I asked students pretty early in the semester, to give me a ranking for all of the different elements of the course that had been included, and just to tell me how helpful are these for you. There are other parts of the feedback form that I also get information on, but for now I just want to share this with you. And it looks like it cuts off a little bit of the names, but you get a sense here. These are the different elements of the course, and so I'm just asking them, what do you find to be helpful? And what may stand out to you, certainly did to me, was if you look down here, when it comes to the breakout rooms, so having the breakout tasks or debates, those scored not that well, and that opened up dialogue with my students to have. That is, of course, was more qualitative and just conversations with students, so I don't have anything to show you, but the feedback was that they felt like there was a lot of pressure going into a breakout room, and some breakout rooms, and I know this from jumping around to different ones, some of them seem to click and really have great dialogue and have a lot of interaction, whereas other ones, it was maybe one person sort of trying to keep everyone going. Whereas others were, as they told me, feeling a little bit put on the spot or uncomfortable with this. So, despite my initial excitement about using breakout rooms, it became clear to me that I needed to modify this in a way that students would feel more comfortable engaging. So, rather than simply leading them into these rooms with a discussion question or prompt or a debate, which in some cases does still work quite well, but just generally I've found that something like what I'm about to discuss may be a little bit more effective. There, I think, are still spaces for breakout rooms where they are primarily discussion-based, but again, just based on the feedback I was getting about how students really felt pretty negatively in some cases about being put into these breakout rooms and then feeling on the spot. So what I shifted towards was creating a shared workspace that could be used in conjunction with the breakout rooms. So I wasn't ready to give up on breakout rooms completely. And in fact, I'm glad I didn't, because this ended up working pretty well. So what I did was create a task that is similar to what I've done in the live classroom as well. So just very quickly, in-person teaching, what I will sometimes do is create a shared workspace of some sort. Now, for our college, we use Google. So I'll either create a Google slide or a Google document or a Google spreadsheet, just depending on what I'm trying to achieve with a given activity. But there are other platforms for doing this, but I'm going to talk about Google just because that's what we use. But know that there are many other ways in which you can create shared platforms for students to engage. So in the classroom, I will actually just post a link on our course management system and then ask students to get in groups, and then they can click on the link. And I've never had an issue, but it's something to be aware of, making sure that at least one student in the group has a phone or computer or tablet that their group can then use to access this shared workspace, and then they have a task to complete. But it's being centered on this external workplace. So they're producing something or manipulating something or just creating something in that space. So rather than it being dialogue driven, it is activity driven, and they can do so digitally. And so I decided to pair this with the breakout room experience to see if that improved the student learning and experience and feedback. So just a few tips for how to do this, and again, this is going to be specific to a Google-based platform, but the same general principles would apply. For me, I just create a new shared workspace in Google Drive. So what I'm going to show you an example of in just a moment is a shared Google slideshow. So I would go through the normal process of creating a new slideshow, and then you do want to make sure that all users have editing access. Now, fortunately, this is pretty easy to do. Where I am, you just click the share link, and then it will actually give you the option to change the sharing permission. And you probably can't see this very well, but you can choose between either letting people view it or actually have editing access. And so when you create the shared workspace, just make sure that you do give editing access to anyone who will be using it so that they can log on through their device, but then manipulate and make changes to the slideshow or the Google Docs. And then, of course, you share your link either through a course management system, or in the case of what I did in the fall, I would usually just post the link in the Zoom chat, because I found if I put it up too early, students were actually logging on and looking at it, which is fine. But if it was, I generally wanted to wait until we had done the background and talked about it before they actually started an activity. Okay. So the example that I will give, because I think it just helps illustrate, is based on, again, an in-class activity that I really enjoy using, and this is in my animal behavior class, but this could be used in any psychological focused course. There are many ways in which you can implement this kind of activity, but it was based on a task where in person I would actually print out these little cards, cut them apart, and then have students group together and sort them into different piles. There's a bigger point to all of that, but not related to what I'm talking about here. So what I did for creating this shared workspace was to simply create digital files. And you can see here all of the different specimens. So I just made images, and then I put them on a Google slideshow that I replicated. Within one slideshow, I replicated the slides for the number of Zoom rooms, as I call them, or breakout rooms that I was planning to have. So this course had 35 students, so I typically wanted no more than 5 students in a breakout room, so I would just plan ahead that I would create 7 breakout rooms. And so I would create my Google slideshow. And in this case, it gives them a little bit about their mission to sort the different images into groups based on which ones they think are closely related to one another. But this could be, again, any kind of task you wanted. And then I just copied it and pasted it and copied it and pasted the slides until I had enough for each of the Zoom rooms I was planning to have. So it's actually quite easy to produce this once you are in there and have your materials there, because you can just copy it for as many rooms as you need. And so you can see here what this shared sheet would look like. So it would say, this is for Zoom Room 2. They have all of their pictures, and then Zoom Team 3, Zoom Team 4, Zoom Team 5. So each team has this set of slides that is basically theirs to work on. This could be as simple as just having one slide per team. That's something that I've done for other class activities. So you just create a slideshow that says Zoom Team 1, Zoom Team 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. And what is nice about the Zoom breakout rooms is it will automatically and randomly distribute students, if you choose to do it that way, into the number of rooms you select, and then students will just end up in a room, and it will say I'm in Zoom Room 3, and they can open the shared workspace and go to the slides for Zoom Room 3. So in this scenario, students went to work in a group, and they sorted the fish images into different groups. Again, it's a really fascinating example. If you're interested, you can look up the whalefish mystery, but that's not related to what we're talking about here. But what they did is they then sorted. So each team had one slide where they sorted all of their pictures into what they agreed upon were the groups. Now, it's really nice as the instructor because you watch all of this happening live, and so you can, if you see one room is maybe not moving many pictures around or not making a lot of progress, it's really easy to pop into that group and just check in and see how you can help. And you can also just, you can begin to get a sense when everyone's almost finished, or if there seem to be common errors that are visually popping up. So this, I just have 2 examples, but in the full, when I was actually doing this, there would have been the 7 of these that are all kind of filling in and being sorted all at once. And so you can kind of keep an eye on all of your groups and then go into breakout rooms as needed. But I really like the sort of overall viewpoint that you get as the instructor. And it doesn't have to be images, right? They could be coming up with some sort of text or doing anything like that, but you can still visually monitor live what each group is doing and then interject or support as needed. Now, for this particular example, we actually came back together as a class and were then able to, again, really easily talk about, well, what are some of the similar conclusions that groups made, or where are some of the big differences? And it was really easy to see and be able to say, groups 1 and 4, you did things very similarly, whereas groups 5 and 6 had a kind of different approach. And so you can see these really macro level kinds of patterns emerge, and students can see those because they can see it all happening as well. And so it's really helpful to be able to come back as a whole group and then have this as a reference to continue your lesson or your discussion. So overall, the student feedback for this was much improved after I started using this sort of shared digital workspace rather than relying more on dialogue or discussion. And so I think it's a useful thing that you can try when you are teaching either online or in person. Again, I've started doing this in my in-person classes, but found that it transitioned well to an online space. And I think that, it's very likely that even if things return to in-person in the following academic year, there are still going to be many cases in which online spaces will continue to develop and provide opportunities for interactions. And so this is just one example of an interactive pedagogy that I recommend, and at least based on the qualitative feedback from students, they also really appreciated. So thank you for your time, and I hope that you find the information presented today to be helpful.